As most of you know, our vision statement here in the Arena Church of Christ is to develop followers of Jesus who love people, love God, and take the gospel to the world. This is visually represented by the graphic you see over the side of the building. Now, as you can see, this is broken down into 3 different sections. We've got connecting, growing, and serving. Now, Matt has just finished up his sermon series on I Love My Church. And the series was made up of 5 different lessons, which actually closely align to our vision statement if you look at them. These topics were I love my church because it loves people. I love my church because it's a community. And I love my church because it serves, because it gives, and because it shares. You know, we all have a variety of different reasons for why we love our church. Most of us wrote down those reasons to put up on the television screen and to put up on the website. As you can see, everyone has something different that speaks to them about this church, whether it's the connections we make, or that it's family-oriented, or that it's a welcoming environment. People like the encouragement they receive. They like what they learn here. Or they like it because of the consistency they receive versus the world. One in particular, though, jumped out at me. It was this simple graphic that Dave wrote on his board. Base camp. A base camp is a place of safety. It's home. It's your starting point before you go out into the world. And so this idea of base camp is what I use for the basis of my lesson today. For a few minutes, I'd like to talk about how a Christian's walk is a lot like mountain climbing. To climb a mountain requires a lot of preparation. Think about what goes into climbing Mount Everest. First up is this book. It's called The Freedom of the Hills. This is the mountaineer's Bible. If you climb mountains, this is the reference book you use for everything. It's what you use for learning about the fundamentals of climbing, for learning about the exercises and training you have to do, the clothes and equipment you need, and everything related to climbing. But for us as Christians, we have this book, the Bible. This is our guidebook for everything in life. From our relationships, to the way we treat other people, to how to live a moral life, to our belief and our faith and our hope. It teaches us how to connect to other people. It teaches us how to grow as good Christians and how to grow closer to God. It teaches us how to follow Jesus' example and learn to serve other people. It teaches us how salvation is possible, and it gives us a guide for reaching heaven. Second up is training. Preparing for a climb of Mount Everest is not an easy task. You have to be in literally the best shape of your life. One person who has summited Mount Everest said this: "You don't want to step foot on one of the world's most deadly peaks without being in the best shape of your life." When I began to train, I was already a marathon runner, but I still needed to hire a trainer twice a week for a year for squat routines and other almost vomit-inducing exercises. Not included in this estimate is the time that it takes away from other things. You'll be running 3 or 4 hours in 90-degree weather, or climbing for 6 to 8 hours in extreme conditions. In the months leading up, I became comfortable with the idea of working out 2 or 3 hours each and every day. To be a good Christian means that we have to train as well. We've talked about this concept on many occasions, but being a Christian is more than just reading the Bible. It's more than just showing up at the church building. But it's actually applying the things that we learn in the Bible. So our training involves actually practicing all those things that we read about. We don't just read about caring for other people. We actually practice caring for other people, whether it's showing compassion to them, or helping them through a difficult time, or studying with them. We don't just read about sharing the gospel, we actually do it. We tell others about Christ, about how he saves us. We don't just read about serving others, we do it. We find ways to serve our friends, to serve our neighbors, to serve our communities, whether it's an activity like a free sale, or serving others in a homeless shelter, or just helping a neighbor with a chore. We also learned that climbing Mount Everest is not a cheap thing to do. There are a lot of costs associated with climbing this mountain. It costs to train, whether it's in buying equipment or hiring a personal trainer. Think about a pair of down gloves. Now, you don't want to skimp on a piece of equipment that saves your fingers from frostbite. These gloves alone cost $300, and you need 2 pairs of them. You also need a jacket, which costs around $600. You need a down suit, which costs around $1,000. Mountaineering boots are around $500. Most people who climb Mount Everest spend somewhere between $8,000 and $10,000 on their equipment. Last is the expedition itself. Most guide companies charge somewhere between $35,000 and $100,000 to climb. Your total cost for summiting Everest is somewhere between $50,000 and $120,000. You know, being a Christian today is costly as well. There are sacrifices you have to make. In the U.S., the sacrifices can be pretty minor. Maybe we don't get to watch our football games on Sunday morning because we're at church. Maybe our vacation gets cut short so we can make it back to the church before they meet. Maybe we don't have as much disposable income because we give, as Matt talked about just a couple of minutes ago. Maybe our afternoons or weekends are tied up because we're out helping somebody. People might look down on you or judge you because you're a Christian. But in the U.S., the costs are pretty low. But in other countries, they can be pretty high. You might face persecution for your beliefs. It might be against the law for you to even worship God. It might be dangerous for people to even know that you're a Christian. You could even face death. Being a Christian can be very costly for us. Interesting things about climbing Mount Everest is how you have to rely on other people. You just cannot do it on your own. While there have been people who have climbed Mount Everest solo, it wasn't really solo. They still relied on a base camp being set up ahead of time. There are a lot of things that go on ahead of time on a Mount Everest summit. Sherpas, who are natives of the Himalayan mountains, carry large amounts of supplies and tents and food and water and set up camp before the climbers ever even get there. Those same Sherpas also go out ahead of the mountain climbers and lay down ladders across crevasses. They lay down static rope lines to help the climbers reach the top. Those Sherpas go up and down the mountain over and over again to make sure that there's a way to the top of the mountain for the climbers. Along the way, they also help the climbers when they get sick, when they get hurt, and when they just need help going up and down. You know, it's the same for us as Christians. We can't do it on our own. We may think we can, but it's not possible. First of all, salvation for us required that Jesus die on the cross for us. Just like the Sherpas made a path to the top of the mountain for those climbers, Jesus made a path for us to heaven, and we can't do it without him. But sometimes, though, even when we acknowledge Jesus and we acknowledge his sacrifice that he made for us and that we need him to get to heaven, we still think we can do things on our own. But we need to remember that Jesus gave us a network of fellow Christians, the church, people just like us who can help us through all the difficult times in our lives, who we can rely on to love us and to care for us and to help us through. We need to remember we can't do it on our own. You know, on Mount Everest, there are a lot of things that can go wrong that you just can't control. Things like earthquakes, a fall, storms. But there are also a lot of things that you can control if you prepare yourself. The last thing I'd like to talk about this morning is what happens when we aren't prepared. When you climb Mount Everest, you are high above any elevation that humans were meant to live at. There's 33% less oxygen than there is at sea level. Your body just isn't equipped to handle something like that. In order to survive, you have to acclimate your body to the elevation. In the months leading up to the climb, many climbers sleep in oxygen deprivation tents. They gradually drop the oxygen percent in their tent to get their body used to it. Then on the mountain you get to base camp, which again is our safe place, and take little excursions up the mountain. You go a little higher each day to get your body more used to the lack of oxygen. And only if you're prepared can you make it to the top. If you're not, there are a lot of things that can go wrong, but one of the worst is something called acute mountain sickness. It can cause a multitude of symptoms from migraines to diarrhea, coughing up blood, cerebral hemorrhaging, even death. You know, as bad as that sounds, if we aren't prepared in our Christian lives, the results are a lot worse. I'm sure most of you remember the parable of the 10 bridesmaids. 5 were foolish and didn't have enough oil for their lamps to get them through the night. They weren't prepared. But the other 5 were prepared and they had extra oil. When the bridegroom came, the 5 prepared bridesmaids were let in. But the 5 unprepared were not let in because they had no light to lamp their faces and they weren't recognized. Jesus concluded his parable in Matthew 25, verse 13, when he said, "So always be ready, because you don't know the day or the hour the Son of Man will come." We have to be prepared or it will have eternal consequences. It can mean the difference between heaven and hell for each of us. Now let's get back to that concept of base camp. On Mount Everest, base camp is home. It's a safe place. When there's a storm, you go back to base camp. When you get sick or you get hurt, you go back to base camp. When you're hungry or tired, you go back to base camp. After you've finished an excursion up the mountain to acclimate yourself, you go back to base camp. It's your safe place. For us as Christians, the church is our base camp. And when I talk about the church, I'm talking about not the building, but each of us, each of the Christians who are here in this building today. When there's struggles and trials in our lives, we rely on the church. When we're hurt and need help, we rely on the church. After a week in the world and all of its sinful influences, we come back to the church to renew ourselves and to invigorate us. Church is our safe place. It's our home. As I conclude, I'd like to share a story I found that I think wraps all of this up pretty nicely. A rich man who heard of a contractor who had fallen on hard times decided to hire the contractor to build him a house. He set a budget for the contractor and gave him the authority to choose the materials used in its construction and to oversee every aspect of its build. The contractor saw this as an opportunity to make back some of his lost fortune. He used the poorest materials and did shoddy work throughout the build. When the house was finished, the rich man said, This house is for you and your family, and you can live in it as long as you please. It is yours forever. The contractor then realized that while he thought he was cheating the rich man, he was really cheating himself and his family. Let's remember that the church is our home. It's our safe place. It's our base camp. Let's remember that our fellow Christians are our family. When we don't give God our all, when we don't live up to our potential, when we don't watch out for each other, when we don't do the things that God has asked of us, we are hurting ourselves and our fellow Christians. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. The next time Mark and myself and Nathan have an opportunity to speak, I'm going to make sure Nathan goes after Mark because he's very temptable. Number one. The good news is I'm too tired to worry about it too much. Mark showed on his board there where we held up our little whiteboards or whatever we wrote. And what I wrote on mine was, because when you think you have nothing, you have everything. And the reason I thought about that is, I was between jobs and this and that, and it's like, oh, this is terrible and blah, blah, blah. Well, you know what, it's not. And I got a job, and my core was here, and my support was here. So when you think you have nothing and you have everything, well, what is everything? Well, everything is really what really matters. We're to love one another. In John 15, verse 12, Jesus said, "This is my commandment, that ye love one another as I have loved you. By doing so, we're loving our church." By loving each other, we're loving our church. Because what is our church? Our church is made up of members. Our members are what makes a church, not the building, as Mark brought out. In John 3:16, Jesus said, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life." For that alone should be enough reason for us to love our church. What a sacrifice. What was given to us. Is that a reason to love our church? Absolutely, in my opinion. And I think in all yours. To love our church and each other, that such a sacrifice was given for us, that is what should be important to us. In 1 John chapter 2, verse 15 says, "Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. For the love of the Father is not in him." So if we're putting our priorities on things of the world, we're not putting our priorities on things of the church or loving the church or making church our priority. By loving God and our Lord Savior Jesus Christ, we're loving our church. I would love to go buy a Jeep Rubicon, and believe me, I will. Okay, I'm going to. Okay, that's something I want to do. But if I make that my priority, there's nothing wrong. I guarantee God's not going to get mad at me if I go buy a Rubicon, but I better put the church first. If that's my priority, then I could buy a Rolls Royce. Not that I'd ever want one, but if church is first, then I'm cool with God, I think. And I don't think there's anybody that should say anything about anybody that gets something, whatever it is, regardless, as long as they put church first in their life. And that's what's important. So I will get my Rubicon, but I'm going to love God. I ad-libbed all this stuff I wrote, so anyway, it sounded better the way I did it. A beautiful thing about our church is that you don't have to pre-qualify someone to belong to the church, like a bank loan, to be a part of it. Christ made the ultimate collateral for us. He gave us that opportunity that we don't have to prove ourselves to anything to belong to the church. We just have to love and have faith and study and work toward it. I love the church because it has open enrollment for everyone, even me. In James 5:6, in chapter 5, verse 16, it says, "Confess your faults to one another, and pray one for another, that ye may be healed. The effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much." Where else can we go and have the opportunity to pray for people and have people pray for us? That's one thing that I really love about this church and our church in general. is the prayers. We have a list of people to pray for. We see prayer lists on our phones coming up all the time. Someone wants prayers, there's no issue. If you want a prayer or you want to pray for someone, send it out, and I truly believe that everybody here does that when they get them at some point. It might not be when you first get it, but at some point you're going to put it in your head and you're going to do it. You know, and I love that. I'm not much for asking for help, but I can tell you this, that if I ever wanted prayers, I could get them. And all I'd have to do is send one message out and everyone would do it for me. And that's the reason I love my church here. Okay, so there goes that paragraph. Okay, here's one thing I do want to point out is that we don't do it out of necessity, we do it because we love to. We do it because we care. So I don't even know why I wrote all this. I love my church for the strength it gives me. And 2 Timothy chapter 4 verse 5 says, "But watch thou in all things, endure affliction, do the work of an evangelist, make full proof of thy ministry." The church gives strength to us all. Mark touched on that when he was referring to his base camp. Every day we go out in the world, we can find ourselves surrounded by not always the best situations or surroundings. The positive strength we receive at church enables ourselves to cope with these situations, to rise above and avoid things that may not be Christian-like. Also so that we may become a positive influence to the world around us. Maybe I should read what I wrote. Another reason I love my church is because it has provided me a map of the way to salvation. When you get directions on MapQuest, it provides you a direction on the way to a destination based on a starting point. It can even warn you of delays in traffic, etc. Eventually you should arrive, but you need to follow the directions. The church also will do this for you to guide you to heaven and eternal life. In 2 Timothy verse 4:8 says, "Henceforth there is laid up for you a crown of righteousness, which is the Lord, righteous judge, shall give me at that day, and not to me only, but to all them also that love his appearing." In 4:9, "Do thy diligence, come shortly unto me." Have you ever been lost while you're driving? I know prior to all of the modern gadgets we have now today, I have. If my wife was in the car and my kids, I would do my best to make sure that they had no doubt that I knew exactly where I was going. Eventually I might give up and get a map, or maybe today I would pull over and punch in on MapQuest. Our church can lead us on the straight and narrow path all the way to heaven. We just need to still follow those directions. In closing, I know this is going fast, but anyway, in closing, lastly, I've given you a few reasons why I love my church. More importantly, how can we show that? We can love our church personally and all that, but I think loving the church is also showing that we love the church. And there's a couple examples here that I'd like to look at. James chapter 2 verse 14. "What doth it profit a brethren, though a man say he hath faith and have not works? Can faith save him?" I don't think so. We could display our love for the church by being doers. You know, there's a difference. Doers are people that get things done, lead, show an example, and not just, status quo. Status quo is what drives a lot of people. And what it does is it drives them in obscurity. What I think we need to be, for me, I think showing love for being why I love my church, I should be showing how I am as far as loving the church, and do that by being there for people and so forth. In Matthew 5:14, "You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid." I challenge myself and all of us to be a city on the hill for all our days, that we may make an influence on someone, that we can make a difference in people we meet. And that is how we can show our love for the church. My thought is if I sent a thing to Matt. There's a project I'm gonna think about taking on, and I'm really excited about it, but I also gotta have the time to do it. But my thought is we're gonna leave this earth with nothing. But if we can leave something behind, that's good. And if we have an influence on one person to bring them into the church, and that they can love the gospel and love God and serve as a Christian, then I think we win. And so, I think the best way we can be an example of why we love our church is by getting out there and showing people what the church is and how it's changed our lives and how we can change ours. That's all I have to say today. So anyway, thank you for your time.
I don't know if it's easier following Kirk or Mark or what. I should have gone first because now my 10-minute lesson is about 3 minutes long. Because they both touched on things that I want to touch on, but I am going to touch on just a little bit more. I know a lot of us haven't been here for our whole series, so I want to talk just briefly on the reasons that I love my church and the reasons that we love Christ Church. And if I can get my phone to do what I want it to do. If you're able to attend a worship service of the Church of Christ in the next few Sundays or in the next, whenever, you probably won't see anything that's going to be too fancy. You're not going to see any dancing around, loud music, things like that. You're going to have a worship service that's pretty subdued, pretty laid back, and just talk about Christ. The simple worship you'll witness will probably fall short of much more entertaining service of large denomination that you see. The members you're going to meet probably are just going to be ordinary, friendly people that are just down to earth. Sometimes here we get a little crazy people, and that's okay. We all need those in our church as well. I don't love the Church of Christ merely because of the people, because you can go to any church and there's going to be good people there. I don't love my church because of the methods that we use, because there's going to be methods out there that are definitely more efficient than some of the things we've tried. The reason that I love my church, though, is because it was built by Christ. It's because of what Jesus in his New Testament said about it. So as we go back, I just want us to look at where it all began. I love the Church of Christ because of when it began. So in Mark 16:13 it says, "And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it." Abraham, Moses, and King David, though they were great men, were not members of the Church of Christ because it hadn't been established yet. That's something that we have right now that they didn't have. Nearly a year after Jesus' words in Matthew 16:13, the church began in Acts 2. With Peter having those keys, and that the doors were opened to the church by him preaching that first sermon in Acts, the 2nd chapter. The Church of Christ didn't begin in Rome in 606 AD. It didn't begin in Germany in 1520, or Holland in 1607, or in England in 1739. The Church of Christ began in Jerusalem the 1st century, just as it was prophesied in Isaiah and Daniel and Genesis and 2 Samuel and all of these places in the Bible that we find. It is by its very nature pre-denominational. There's no denominations that were around. It was the Church of Christ, or you were worshiping these false gods. We find that Maya is a possessive. It means the church belongs to Jesus, which he paid for with his life. When he died on that cross, he built this church. And as we take on that name Christian, it means that we're Christ-like. It means that we need to die for this church. We need to do everything we can to do what Jesus did for this church, to live our lives, to leave here and to show Christ living in us through the things that we do. Mark already talked about that. Kirk talked about that. I'm going to end because I really don't have a whole lot more to say, and I was going to walk over and read because I can't see that far, but I was going to read some of the things off that we read or that we wrote down, and I wanted to end with what Dave wrote. That was where I was going to end with, because when we get into times of trouble and we get into where we feel like there's no place to go. This is our camp. This is our base. And like Kirk said, when we need prayers, we have them. And that's what the church should mean to all of us. It means a place of safety when life isn't going right for us. And so I think next time I do this, I'm going to go first because I don't even know where my lesson ended. So we're gonna end there with just on that note, with knowing that that we are a family here, and that we need to take ownership of the church. We need to make it our own, just as it's Christ's church and He died for it. We need to do everything possible that we can to live and to show this community the church, because without us, people aren't going to know Christ, and it's only through us that they can do that. So at this time, if you've never obeyed the gospel, we have a wonderful opportunity to do so, to come forward to make your wants and wishes known and be baptized into the Church of Christ. And if you have, it's a wonderful opportunity. If you've strayed, if you do things in your life that you're not proud of, and you need the prayers when you're struggling, just to come back to the base camp of the church and to have the prayers of the church. So I forgot to bring my songbook up there. Don was leading anyway. So let's stand and we'll sing the invitation song.